Hey everyone, welcome to an introduction video about how to do a math work sample. This is designed to help students who need to take a math work sample to pass essential skills know what's going to happen, how it's graded, and what kind of things you need to do to have a passing work sample. All right, so you want to graduate. Part of the Oregon graduation requirements is that students meet essential skills in both math, reading, and writing. So either you are passing your math state assessment, the ones that we always take in the spring, or you're passing an alternative approved assessment, or you're completing a math work sample. That's what your goal is here, because either you opted out or you did not pass the math state assessment in previous years. So for a math work sample, you need to pass a total of 2 work samples from 2 different categories. So you have your choice of algebra, statistics, or geometry, and you just have to pick 2 of those. So you could do algebra and geometry, you could do algebra and statistics, or you could do a statistics problem and a geometry problem. A math work sample is an assessment of depth, not breadth. So when you do a work sample, you're only given one problem, but you need to work it out thoroughly and completely and show all of your work and go through all these different steps as part of the process to say, yes, I do know high school level math. Let's talk a little bit more about what is on a math work sample. Here's the official scoring guide that we use. Again, this is a plain language version for students. We give you a copy of the scoring guide while you're doing the work samples, but we're gonna see what you're gonna be graded on. If you look on the left, there's 5 different categories: making sense of the task, representing and solving the task, communicating and reasoning, accuracy, and reflecting and evaluating. To get a passing score, you need to have a score of 4 or better in each one of those 5 categories. So for example, if you look on the top, it gives you a breakdown about what you would have to do to get a 5 or 6, which would be a very good work sample. There's a column where it shows what you need to do to get a 4, which is passing. And there's also columns that show what not passing looks like. So do you get a 3 or 2 or a 1 would be not passing, and it gives some descriptions around what that looks like. Let's break down each of these a little bit more because again, I want you to pass, I want you to be successful. And so knowing what you're going to be graded on is very important as you're doing your work sample. Let's talk about making sense of the task. For a 5 or 6, you're taking the problem, you're looking at the word problem that's given, and you are making a plan, you are identifying this is what the problem is doing or asking, and so I need to use this type of math to help get there. You're developing the ideas, you're interpreting it correctly, you're understanding what's happening. For a score of 4, you're simply taking the words, taking the word problem, and interpreting it into the right math tasks that'll work and get you to the right answer. You can see for a score of 1, 2, or 3 for not passing, that's places where you're interpreting the problem incorrectly, you're not using the right math based on what the problem is showing you, or you're simply not showing understanding. So again, to get a passing score, you have to be able to read the problem and understand exactly what it's asking you to do, and use some good math in a way that as a person grading it could see, oh yeah, they clearly understand what the problem is and are using a good approach to solving this. Representing and solving the task. There's a little bit of overlap with understanding the task. Representing and solving it is kind of your process. So representing would be, what are you using to show? How are you getting there? What math steps? Are you using equations? Are you using graphs? Are you using a chart? Are you using some sort of picture? But something that you're representing what's going on and then showing the process of solving it out. So for 5 or 6, you have a thoroughly developed plan. You're using advanced math and it's connected to all your other ideas. For a score of 4, you have a complete plan. You say, here's the problem. Here's what it's asking you to do. I'm gonna go do these steps and this math process to get to the solution. For a 1, 2, or 3, if you're not passing, that means you have missing parts, or it means you're not using high school level math. If you just guess once and it happens to kind of work, that's not going to be high school level math. We want to see that you're doing those things that you learned in your algebra class or your geometry class or your algebra 2 class to help you get to the problem. Communicating and reasoning. This is the third category. This is where you want to very clearly show from the start of the problem to your final answer how you got there, so that there's no gaps, there's no missing parts, so that someone could very easily follow step by step what you did and say, wow, that was a really good problem. So for a 5 or 6, which would be a really high score, you have very clear work. You have an explanation connecting each of the parts using precise math language. You've labeled things, you've identified things. As a grader, all your numbers, all your symbols, everything makes sense and is explained and laid out very clearly. Even for a passing score of 4, the work is clear, you've clearly identified the answer, and you're using math words and symbols. Not passing is where there's gaps. It's where there's a number that shows up, and if I'm grading it, I don't know where that number came from. Or you're using some sort of calculation, and I don't know why you did that calculation. It's not explained. Or you're just jumping around, or there's different things. If it's hard to follow, you're probably not going to get a passing score on communicating and reasoning. The fourth category is simply, did you do it correctly? It's accuracy. So to be a passing score, you have to get the answer fully correct. Your answer has to fit with all your work that you did in terms of explanations. If you have formulas, if you worked it out, but then you have some other number that appears out of nowhere, even if it's right, you're not going to get a passing score because it has to fit with all of your other work that you did in the problem. And the solution has to answer the question asked. So make sure you're going back, looking at the word problem, saying, what's that question that I have to answer? And am I answering that question? If you do your work mostly correct, but make a little mistake in terms of calculation, even if it's mostly correct, you will still not be passing because it has a small error. Part of the work sample is checking your work. And so I want to see that you're checking your work and making sure it's fully correct. Finally, the fifth category, this is the toughest one for students, is simply reflecting and evaluating. So to get a really, really high score, you are looking at the problem, you've already solved it out partway and communicated, but to check your work, you can solve it using a second method, a different method. Maybe you solved it with equations one way, and now you're going to compare it with a graph and use it to check your work that way. Maybe you used a graph first, and then you're going to use a chart and just kind of see that both match up. So evidence is there, you're checking it. To be a passing score, you also have to fully answer the question in a complete sentence. So if all your math is there and you end up with some answer and circle it, unless you fully answer the question with a complete sentence, I can't give you a passing score on your math. You're double checking, you're looking over to make sure things make sense. For reflecting and evaluating, if you don't pass, that means there is no check. I can't see that there was a check. I can't see that there was a review. I don't see a different method. I don't even see where you've written out the answer and if it makes sense in the context of the problem. So make sure you're actually labeling, here's my reflection, and what you're doing to double check over all of your work. Okay, let's take a look at a non-passing and passing example. Here's one. So in this task on the right, you can see that you're given a couple of equations and the problem says who wins. Each person has an equation representing how high they throw the ball. So this one is not passing. If you look on the left, they got a score of 2 for making sense of the task. What that means is they looked over the problem. You can see they used a formula, but they used the incorrect formula. They used b over 2a when they need negative b over 2a. So they kind of made sense of it. They got some credit of it, but they didn't use the appropriate strategy to get there. They also got a 3 on representing and solving the task. So if they had the correct formula, that would have been a general good strategy. For communicating and reasoning, if you look through, they didn't really explain much, did they? So there's no words, they kind of show the work there, but they didn't answer the question. They kind of circled some things. The work is kind of easy to follow with what they did, but they didn't they didn't answer the question that was asked of them. So they got a 3 on communicating and reasoning. For accuracy, obviously it's incomplete. They used the wrong formula. So when they got to the answers, they got negative numbers. So it's kind of just not a correct answer. And there is no attempt at reflecting and evaluating or looking back over the problem. And so they got a 1 on reflecting and evaluating. Let's take a look at a passing example. Same problem. But here you can see that the student did a whole lot more. So they had to kind of cram it in. Again, the same sort of thing. If you're doing all your work, I want to see lots of stuff on your work sample. So they, up at the top right, you can see they used the correct formula, circled things throughout. They got making sense of the task. They got a score of 5. So they made sense of it. You can see in words, they explained the problem. They said, here's what I need to do. I need to find the maximum of both equations. So they're explaining, making it really easy to do it. They're making sense of the math they did. So they can say, Hannah, her X value is a 1, which I can match up with the formula that they used on the right. For representing and solving the task, they got a 4 because the strategy was effective and it led to the right solution. They used the right formula, they interpreted the problem correctly, they had the right steps to get there. For communication, it's a 5 because it was really easy to follow both their algebra and they did a very good job of laying out how they interpreted the problem, what their algebra led to. You can even see a part where they put answer and then they clearly answered in a complete sentence. And then there's even the check part. So they did plenty of communication on the left to match all their math symbols, algebra, graphs, etc. on the right. The solution was correct, so that was pretty easy. Got a 4 for accuracy. And then for reflecting and evaluating, they used graphs, so they got a second way to kind of check their work. And so they actually got a score of 5 on reflecting and evaluating. And you can see on the words on the left there, they have check. So they clearly said, here's how I'm checking my work. I graphed the 2 functions and was on my calculator, was able to look and see, oh yeah, clearly 1 was too high, 1 was too low. So hopefully this gives you a good idea of what passing and what not passing on a work sample looks like. It is now your turn. Definitely take your time. Use the scoring guide that we give you, again, the one we went over, to help you know if you've done all the parts that you need to, so you can have the best chance of getting a passing score. You cannot receive any help. You cannot talk with anyone else. You cannot Google any math topics or answers. You cannot even ask to clarify, well, what is this question asking? Am I doing this correct? You can only have someone read you the problem out loud, but then it's entirely up to you. When you are done, when you're finished, you can turn in your work sample. If there's a grader there who can grade it, you'll be given your work back with the feedback form. And if it's passing, it'll indicate passing. If it's not passing, it'll show not passing and it'll check mark the scores that you got. And you are allowed to revise your work sample and fix it to get it up to passing if it is not passing. For example, if you got a 2 on communication and reasoning, and you want to get it up to 4, that means you probably did not show your work very well. You did not explain very well. So you might go back and try to help the person understand what you did step by step by step. If you got a score of 3 on accuracy, that means you were close to getting the problem correct, but you made a small mistake. So you might go back, check your work, make it part of your reflection and evaluating and find out where that mistake was and bring it up to a passing score. So you can revise your work sample if it's not initially passing. All right. Good luck. Hopefully this is a helpful guide to you as you are doing your own math work samples, and do your very best.